Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Oh Yum 201. It is my pleasure to be back here presenting live to you today. Hello to everyone around the world. It's fabulous to see where everyone is joining me. I saw someone writing they're joining me from outside San Antonio, Texas. Massachusetts that's about to get hit with some snow. Oh, that must be a nor'easter. That means we might be getting it tomorrow. It'll make its way west because I'm joining you from southern Ontario, not far away from a nice little waterfall you might have heard of called Niagara Falls. And hello from around the world. If you're joining me late at night from Southeast Asia or Australia, in the evening from Europe, or in a comparable within a few hours here in North or South America, I'm so pleased you could join me because today we are making a decadent, double glazed chocolate marble cake. Now, this is really something special. This is not a recipe you will have seen on my channel or anywhere. This is a brand new recipe. And the reason I wanted to rework the way I think about a marble cake is the most common recipe. Take a marble pound cake. You make your pound cake recipe, you take some of the batter out, and you just stir in some cocoa powder, maybe some melted chocolate. And what I find happens is it changes the texture of the batter, and you don't really get that full complement of vanilla against chocolate cake. It's the same cake with just a little tweak to it. So with this recipe, I make two completely separate batters, but when you taste them together, they are beautiful. And the marble swirl just has such a gorgeous character to it. And then I match that with a swirled marble glaze on top. So I'm going to get right to it. First, a quick hello to my mom, dad, and Michino if you're watching. I know Kathy's watching, Hermione's watching, lots of regulars, Bonnie down the street who always counts on her Thursday afternoon delivery after I'm done making this cake. So you'll see in the recipe that's beneath this window, I start with the chocolate cake and I move into the vanilla cake. You can flip it the other way around if you wish. The order in which you make each cake batter doesn't matter because you're going to combine them both in the pan at the same time. So for the sake of ease, I'm going to actually start with the vanilla cake first because it's made using electric beaters or a stand mixer, and I want to get that out of the way sooner. So this vanilla cake recipe follows the reverse method. I'm going to sift my dry ingredients into my mixing bowl. I've already got my 150 grams of all-purpose flour or a cup in my sifter. I'm going to add to that my sugar. And so normally with a cake recipe, like a pound cake recipe, you start by beating your butter and sugar together. You add the eggs, and then you alternate your dry with your liquids. The reverse method, we're going to put all our dry in the bowl, including the sugar, even though it's dry right now, but it won't be later. I've got my 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder, my little bit of salt in there, and I'll just give this a quick sift in. So this is just a lovely light vanilla cake that is easy to bake. You could bake this in a smaller pan or double it up to make a full-sized vanilla cake if you didn't want to do the marble version. I'll need that sifter again, and I'm going to just take a peek. Don't forget, I'm keeping an eye on the chat thread, so I am welcoming your questions from everywhere. And I see Teresa Marie, you asked a question earlier about using puff pastry. My scratch puff pastry recipe makes a large batch because I find if you're going to go through the effort of making puff pastry from scratch, you might as well make a lot because it freezes wonderfully. Then for a single crust, whether it's a tatin or I think you mentioned a steak pie you wanted to bake, if you're just putting a single layer on top, 250 grams of pastry is sufficient. So what I do is I break my puff pastry dough into 250 gram sheets or pieces, and that way I know I have what I need for a basic recipe. So I hope that answers your question. I have just added my diced butter, which is at room temperature, to my dry ingredients. And now I'm going to cut this in just like I was making maybe a pie dough or a scone dough. But where a pie dough or scone dough uses cold butter, here I want the butter to be at room temperature so that ultimately, once I add the liquids, it breaks down. So this can be on a medium-low speed. Of course, we have Michael behind the cameras running all these different camera angles so you can see everything clearly. We've got Rob and Sandra behind the tech and on the thread in case I can't get to a question soon enough. Hello to you from Malaysia and Saudi Arabia. Thanks for watching. Sometimes it's morning or afternoon from Indiana. Excellent. Great to see everybody. So now I'm just cutting this in. If you're using your electric beaters, it takes about the same amount of time. And I'm just looking for that butter to break down a little bit. So the whole mixture is dry and crumbly. It won't look like a pie dough because of that quantity of sugar. Don't forget there's all that sugar in there. Actually, oh, good question. Maria Natasha is asking, what if you use the traditional method instead of this reverse method? Yes, Natasha Marie, you could definitely use that method. You may find you're just simply using more bowls and dishes. What I like about the reverse method is I find it's very tidy. And when you're alternating, if you're going to go back to then alternating your dry with your wet ingredients, make sure you're scraping that bowl often. So that's why I adapt a lot of my recipes to this reverse method. Less scraping of the bowl. And if you joined me last week for the Basque cheesecake, that burnt cheesecake, oh, I was scraping my bowl a lot. If you missed that video, you'll have to go take a peek. I see we're already at 370 likes. Over that now. That's absolutely amazing. Let's see if we can get ourselves, I'm going to raise the bar. I'm not even going to bother with 400. We're going to go for 500 likes. And then I will tell you what I will be making during the next live stream, because that still hasn't been announced yet. Oh, Teresa Marie, you're asking some very specific questions about the puff pastry, and without the dough directly, the recipe directly in front of me, I don't know that I can answer them precisely. But what I'll recommend is go to the puff pastry recipe on the thread. I'll go take a peek at those direct questions, and then I can answer them when I get a chance. I have to do the dishes after I finish up here. Okay, I have to pay attention to this cake batter. So you've got this crumbly mixture. So like I said, it doesn't look like when you cut butter into a pie dough. And because of the sugar, it's got this granular texture. Now it's time to add the ingredients, which go in all at once. You don't even have to combine them together in a bowl separately. You can just add them right to the mixer. So I am using today kefir, which is a fermented yogurt beverage. So it's thinner in consistency than a yogurt coming from a tub. You could use buttermilk, and if you don't have access to buttermilk or yogurt, you can use or kefir. What you can do is take the ½ cup measure of milk, take out a tablespoon of the milk, replace it with a tablespoon of lemon juice. That will add the acidity. The acidity is key to getting the right lift. This vanilla cake has to bake along with the chocolate cake at the same rate in the oven for it to hold together, be the similar texture. I've just added my 2 egg whites. So I really want this vanilla cake to be nice and bright. So it's the kind of cake you would make a confetti cake with if you were to add sprinkles to, or a wedding cake. So it really contrasts nicely with the chocolate. I'm adding my teaspoon of vanilla, and away we go. We start mixing. First, I mix on low speed to combine everything. And now this is where, contrary to a regular cake, you have to mix on low speed initially. This, we want to work in some structure and volume. When you're baking a cake traditionally and you start with creaming the butter and sugar, that's where you're building in the structure. Here, we're building in the structure at the very end. So right now, the sugar is starting to dissolve because we've added the liquids, and we're building some volume. And because we've protected the flour with that coating of butter, it won't toughen up the batter. And so I'm just going to let this go for another 5 seconds. Beautiful. And now we've got this fluffy, well-combined vanilla cake batter. So that's half of our cake making already taken care of. Here we go. I'm going to just set this aside. And we'll come back to that in a moment because now it's time to make the chocolate cake. And is it okay, Michael, if I just move this out of the way here? Excellent. So the chocolate cake batter you can make by hand. It's comparable ingredients in similar proportions, so you can see how the two cake batters differ, but because the texture and consistency is a little different, we treat it a little differently. But the ease is it can be mixed by hand. What we are going to do right away is first melt our butter and chocolate together. So I've got my combination of butter and dark baking chocolate. It's up to you if you'd like to use semi-sweet, so in that 51 to 65% category, or if you want to use bittersweet up to 70%. I don't recommend higher than that or your cake will be too strong and also too dry. The higher the percentage in your chocolate, the less room there is for cocoa butter, and that can actually throw off your cake ratio and the texture. So maximum 70%, but from 51 up to there. So long as it's baking chocolate, I've got the chips. And you'll notice I'm melting this stovetop. Because I have equal amounts of chocolate and butter, when I have so much butter in the recipe, it protects the chocolate. So it can go on a direct heat, and that means it melts a whole lot faster. You want to do this on low. If you wanted to, you could melt your chocolate and butter together in the microwave. That works just fine. Again, like melting stovetop, you've got the butter protecting the chocolate. So in the microwave, while it's difficult to melt chocolate on its own, it's easier to melt it when you've got the butter. But you want to try and avoid letting it get too hot. So for me, stovetop's always a little bit simpler. While this is finishing melting, I'm just going to take a peek at our questions here. Oh, Hermione, you're asking a great question. Can we make one cake recipe at the end, half them, and then add the chocolate? That is what I have found is not as effective as these two different recipes. It's worth going through the effort of making the separate batters just to really get the matching taste and texture together. So that's a great question to ask. I know it means making two cake batters. I've tried to keep it as simple as possible, but I hope you give this a try. And compared to previous marble cakes you may have made, I hope you see the difference. This is just such a moist, tender cake, and that chocolate vanilla balance is spot on. If you're, we're getting close to 500 here when I reveal what will be the next live stream I'm doing. These are some good questions. Ira's asking, what other flavors can I make with the marble cake? Well, you can add flavors to the vanilla and to the chocolate. Before we started the live stream, Hermione asked if she could use coffee. Coffee would be a beautiful addition to the chocolate portion of the cake. You could add lemon zest or orange zest to the vanilla cake or the chocolate as well. Let's see. Lavender could work. You could work in spices, like chai spices, into the chocolate layer cake. Don't get too crazy because we've already got the vanilla coffee going on. Or you could how about play coffee and tea? So you could add coffee to the chocolate layer, and then you could work in some either matcha green tea or maybe an Earl Grey tea into the vanilla cake. That would be a fun one. Okay. And now that I've melted the butter and chocolate, I'm going to pour it into my mixing bowl. And you'll notice the instructions say to let it cool for 5 minutes. Well, I'm going to accelerate the cooling a little bit. The reason I ask for the cooling is to try and have both batters be at a like consistency when it's time to swirl them in the pan. So I'm going to rush it a little bit by adding first my brown sugar, which will cool down the chocolate a little bit. So I call for brown sugar because that's common in a chocolate cake recipe. It helps give flavor, and brown sugar has a moisture to it, and it has a slight caramel taste, which really complements the chocolate. I also call for adding just 1/3 cup, so 80 milliliters of water. So I've made this water, the water is cool. It's not ice cold because we don't want to shock the chocolate. We want to ease it into cooling down. And let me grab a whisk. And now we'll whisk this together. Gives a chance for the brown sugar to dissolve. It's cooling down the chocolate mixture, which is why now I can add the sour cream after it's had a chance to cool a little bit. We also want to cool it down a little bit before we add the eggs. Oh, and here's a question. SC is asking, how can I use powdered buttermilk instead of liquid buttermilk? You add water to it. So you actually, just like you would make milk using milk powder, you do the same with your buttermilk. So usually there's a proportion, depending on the buttermilk powder that you buy. I don't know how much you would add, probably a couple tablespoons for a cup. And then by rehydrating it, poof, you have buttermilk. You want to let it sit for a little bit. I do call for sour cream in this chocolate cake recipe. Where I call for buttermilk or kefir in the vanilla cake. And again, it's trying to find a batter consistency match. Not as critical to the recipe. I love the flavor of sour cream, but I know in some countries, sour cream is very difficult to find. Using a thicker yogurt, like a Greek yogurt, will do just fine in place of the sour cream. And that's what I would recommend. You could try the buttermilk, but just be prepared that your chocolate batter then might be thinner than your vanilla cake batter. But now I'm just going to give this a little feel. Yes, it's cooled down, so it's just above room temperature. So I can move and add my eggs one at a time, giving them a nice little whisk after each addition. Oh, and we've got people watching from Malaysia. It's very late in Malaysia. Our clocks will be changing, I think, in 2 weeks, Michael, won't they? Daylight savings. So we'll be an hour closer, so you won't have to stay up quite as late. It'll be 12:15 in a couple weeks when you join me for the next live stream. And yes, Leonard, you are right. We've crossed over 500 likes, and so because this is Oh Yum 201 and we want to take our baking learning to the next level, I'm going to go through the lesson of how to temper chocolate. So we'll go through it step by step live. I like to use a marble to temper my chocolate. I'll also talk about seeding, which is the other way to temper chocolate. And then I'll make some lovely little, we don't have quite the time to do a full bonbon lesson, but I'll make some lovely mendiants, which are beautiful little chocolates with add-ins on top. So you'll get a real sense of what it takes to temper chocolate, what it feels like, and I want to instill that confidence that you will be able to temper chocolate. So that will be the one. Now, as a note, that is not next Thursday. It's 2 weeks from now. Have to step away. I'm already engaged next week, so can't make it for a live stream on Thursday, but I'll be joining you the following week. But you can just make sure you're subscribing to the channel so you get those notifications when they're coming up. So I hope you're, Leonard says, the chickens are already awake where you are. Wow, thank you for staying up late, getting up early, whatever it is, to join me as I make this decadent chocolate marble cake. Okay, so the eggs are worked in, and now we're gonna sift in the dry ingredients. 150 grams, a cup of flour, just like the vanilla cake. And I like to bolster the chocolate flavor. So we have all that melted chocolate, but I still add 3 tablespoons of cocoa powder. Dutch process is ideal here. Will it work with a conventional cocoa powder? Yes, because it's such a small measurement, but Dutch process has some of the acidity pulled away from it, so it gives me more control when I'm adding my baking powder and salt. So this chocolate portion of this marble cake will rise up at the same level and at the same time as the vanilla cake. It's all about the timing. quick little tidy up here. And now, just whisk everything in. Because of the structure of that quantity of chocolate and butter at the base of this recipe, you don't have to whip it at the same rate as you do the vanilla to give the cake the structure. It's already got that sort of body and bulk to it. But you do want to give it a good whisk by hand to make sure to remove any lumps. Make sure it's nice and smooth. I didn't add vanilla to the chocolate cake. Chocolate itself already has vanilla added to it, but I also want the vanilla in the vanilla cake to be the star. Can you tell I've given this marble cake a lot of thought? This is what I think of when I'm falling asleep at night. And how's everyone doing? Oh, people are staying up late, getting up early. Christina, it is 10 to 4 in the morning. My goodness. Well, thank you for joining me. And I hope you'll have sweet chocolate dreams either before this or after this. So now we've got our two batters, our chocolate batter and our vanilla batter. And when you look at them side by side, the proportion seems different because it is. There is more chocolate cake batter, but that's because of the quantity of the chocolate and the butter we added, which adds more bulk. But ultimately, when these cakes bake up together, because of the egg whites in the vanilla cake, it will take up a little more space. Because of the chocolate, the batter itself is a little more dense and it doesn't expand at the same. This is why we're making two different cakes, because they'll ultimately be the same in proportion, but as batters, they look a little bit different. Now, your choice of pan, if you want to serve the cake in the pan to the table, because this is one you glaze in the pan, you could use a porcelain or ceramic baking dish, or you can, if you wish, bake in a metal pan. What's very important is I'm going to talk about the difference in the cook time. I don't put parchment in the pan because I'm going to pour the glaze right in the pan and we're going to cut portions right out of it. But what we're going to do is now get into the dolloping and the swirling. So as this chocolate batter sits, you will find as the chocolate cools, it thickens up. And you don't have to be terribly tidy here. But just give yourself some nice, good chocolate dollops. And then I want you to do the same with the vanilla cake batter, filling in wherever you can find a little bit of space in between the chocolate dollops. Again, they can overlap. They don't have to be perfect because we are going to swirl. Get a little batter in that corner. And now I will continue on. Oh, yes, good. Believe him or not, yes, I did grease the pan. You can use butter or spray, whatever you wish, but yes, you definitely have to grease the pan. So now I'm putting the chocolate batter on top of wherever I see vanilla cake batter, like so, and let's get every last bit out. And now to finish off with some dollops of the vanilla batter. And you don't worry about spreading this cake batter. You don't want to spread it. We're going to use a skewer to marble and sort of pull the batter in and around itself. Okay, there we go. So you can use a skewer if you wish. You can use the back of a paring knife or a spatula and swirl away. Oh, Patricia, I'm glad you like the kitchen, the new kitchen. Yep, spent a little time doing some work on this and yeah, enjoying working out of it. And this ultimately, I still have my home kitchen with my oven, but this gives me now 2 ovens that I can test and develop recipes. So I can really compare bake times and cook times and make sure I get everything spot on. So I'm just swirling away. Really pull that vanilla cake through the chocolate. And there we go. And now this is ready for the oven. I've preheated the oven to 325. And so it takes a gentle heat. Now the big difference is if you're baking in a metal pan, metal conducts heat quickly, and so it will bake the cake faster. It'll get the heat into the center of the cake faster, and it takes about 40 minutes. If you're baking in a ceramic baking dish, it can add an extra 20 minutes of bake time. Because while a ceramic dish holds the heat, it takes a lot longer for it to heat up, and then that pan has to heat the batter inside. And it's amazing that it can add 20 minutes of cook time, but that's what can happen. So be prepared. If you've made the choice of a metal pan versus the ceramic or porcelain pan, you're adding 20 minutes of cook time if you're baking in porcelain. But it looks so beautiful. So I have made one of each. This one is going into the oven. And I'll just set my timer to 40 to check it. But of course, you have to let it cool completely before you put the marble glaze on top. So this version I have baked in a porcelain pan, and so it did take the full 60 minutes. And you test the doneness like you do every cake of this style. You insert a skewer in the center, pull it out. When it comes out clean, you know you're done. And see, you can see you've got a golden top to it. It does turn a little more golden brown when you keep it in the oven for 20 minutes longer. But once you cut into it, you're going to get that beautiful contrast. And you can really see that compared to the cake I put in the oven, actually I'll pull it back out so we can look at them side by side, the before and after. With this cake, it looks like there's more chocolate than vanilla, but once it bakes up, this is where the vanilla really fills in the gaps, so you get a really proper 50-50 proportion of chocolate to vanilla. There we go. So now that this cake has cooled completely, it's time to make our glaze. This is kind of my new favorite glaze, and I'm using it in all sorts of applications, not just for this cake. I think it would make a delicious glaze on top of profiteroles or eclairs if you're into making choux paste. It's decadent, it slices well, and it's got great flavor. And I'm doing a marble version, and one side is going to be dark chocolate, and the other side is going to be white chocolate. So I've got equal amounts of butter. You'll see the recipe calls for 3/4 of a cup or 180 grams of butter divided. So you want 90 grams or 6 tablespoons in each bowl. And then again, it's about proportion to have a similar texture that swirls well. I have my 3 ounces or 90 grams of dark chocolate, but for the white chocolate glaze, to get that same consistency, I need 5 ounces or 150 grams. So what I'm going to do is go back to our chocolate cam. Michael's got our sauce cam rolling here. And we're gonna first melt the white chocolate and butter together. And then I'll melt the dark chocolate and butter together. And then to that, we're going to add condensed milk. And that's what turns it so sweet. So this will take a couple minutes. I'll stir them occasionally. This is a perfect opportunity for me to take some questions from you as we let the chocolate melt before we add the condensed milk. So we've got our marble cake in the oven, our cooled one here. We're making the marble glaze. And Shona is asking, before Shona, I'll tackle your question about silicone pans, because there was a question about glass versus metal. The choice is yours. Ceramic and porcelain. Porcelain is has a finer grit to it and is more temperature resistant and is less likely to chip, but it behaves just the way ceramic does in terms of slow heating up. Glass behaves similarly. So it takes a little time to heat up, but it really holds the heat, which is why I love a glass pie plate when I'm making a fruit pie, because it really helps set that crust, gives it a nice golden brown, and keeps it waterproof while you've got a liquid filling cooking in there. And then Shona asked about silicone pans. I like silicone, but the opposite, silicone does not conduct heat at all. So what can happen if you've got a really wet batter, quite often you see them for muffin tins, it will actually steam the muffin. So you won't get that crust. You'll get it on the top of the muffin, but not on the sides. If you're going to use silicone pans, make sure you tip your baked goods out of the pan very soon after they've finished baking, so that they don't develop even further condensation and become really soft or soggy on the outside. Very good questions. Jennifer's asking, where is this recipe? Look right below. If you expand the show more screen, the complete recipe, all the ingredients, all the steps are right there. This video will be posted up on the channel. So if you're watching in Australia and Southeast Asia and have decided you just have to go to bed, don't worry, you can catch the end of it. Or if you missed a point, you can please come back and join me again right here, because this will be posted. Oh, and hello from Kelby in Missouri. And we've got a question about double acting baking powder. Yes, most baking powder now is double acting. It may or may not say it on the label. And what that means is the baking powder reacts first when you start liquefying it and mixing it in the batter. It doesn't work as quickly as baking soda does, but it still does start to come to life. But then it also will activate when heat hits it. So once that batter warms up, it lifts again. And that's also why you sometimes see recipes call for baking powder and baking soda, because baking soda kicks in quickly, but it expends itself quickly, where baking powder kicks in afterwards. Very good question. Lady Gaga is asking about adding almond flour to a pie crust. And yes, the pie crust will become crumbly because you're pulling away the gluten, the protein that wheat flour adds to a pie crust. So you have to look at changing your recipe a little bit. Right here on my channel, I have a recipe for a pear cranberry pie with a gluten-free pie crust. And you have to, instead of using just ground almonds, you have to look at adding a starch, because you're pulling out the protein from the flour. So a tapioca starch will add some structure to the recipe. And instead of adding water, I add egg whites, because egg whites are pure protein. And so that will help crisp up and hold your crust in place. These are great questions. Should I want to do a Q&A session later on? So there'll be more to come. I think we're going to ask you about what sort of topics you might want to cover. Such a big part of these live demonstrations are handling your questions, and I love it. That I don't want to take away from that, but nor do I want to take away from the recipe itself. So I should give this butter and chocolate a stir. And look at that. 3 questions later, our white chocolate and butter is almost melted. You want to stir that white chocolate gently, because it's got a really high fat content. If you see it separate a little bit, don't panic, because once we add the condensed milk, it will smooth everything out again. I'm going to pull this off the heat to let the carryover heat of the bowl continue melting this. And I'm going to put the dark chocolate one on. I'll wipe the bottom of my bowl. When we do tempering chocolate in 2 weeks, you'll see that's a big part of it. Keeping water away from your chocolate is critical to the success. All right, a couple more questions just while we melt the dark chocolate and butter together. Ira's asking, is there a suitable substitution for the condensed milk? It's hard. We'd be looking at a different recipe, I believe. You could actually glaze with just the straight chocolate and butter, and it would set more firmly. But the condensed milk really is the secret to this particular glaze. But I do have other glazes out there, like the ganache style glaze, adding some cream. So instead of replacing the condensed milk, we're replacing the recipe itself with something different. And you'll find I have a number of ganache glazes right here on the Oh Yum channel. Great question. I love this because I know we're all just so into this. This is awesome. Hermione's asking where to store the cake because of the glaze. I do like to refrigerate the cake after it's got the glaze on it. That's another thing I've really put to the test in this recipe. The cake itself won't dry out in the fridge, which some cakes can. This stays nice and moist, but you do want to store it in the fridge. And, oh, Justin, great question. Can this style of marble cake be used as a layer cake? Yes, I think for this proportion, because you'll see when I take out a slice, this cake sits quite high, that you could divide this between two 8-inch cake pans. Not that you do one chocolate and one vanilla, but you could swirl into both. That's a very good question. In that case, you would want to grease the pan and flour the sides of it, line the bottom with parchment so it tips out easily. Great question. And Shveta is asking, can we use a cocoa glaze? A cocoa glaze could work, yes, on this cake if you don't have condensed milk. Excellent questions. Shona's asking, does homemade condensed milk work as well as store-bought? I don't know. Condensed milk is different than dulce de leche. I don't know that I've made condensed milk. I think it takes a special condenser. It's different than evaporated milk. That's a very good question that I don't have the immediate answer to. And Michael's going to the chocolate cam just because the dark chocolate is almost melted. I just want to get some of those butter pieces out there. Let me see if I can grab another question. Oh, yes. The question, can I make a bundt out of this recipe? This would make a delicious bundt cake, in which case you could put both glazes on top or just one. Because remember, this glaze will run off the sides of a bundt cake, so maybe just one color of glaze would work. And you wouldn't need to double up either, just because of the surface area. This makes a nice thick coating of the glaze, so it replaces the need for a buttercream frosting. Okay, and we're just about there. I'll shut my heat off, dry the bottom of my bowl. And now you'll see in the recipe below, I talk about warming the condensed milk. And the reason I want to do that is because if I put in a room temperature condensed milk into the chocolates, it will tighten up the chocolate, it will start setting, and then you won't be able to get an effective swirl when you put it on top of the cake. So you can empty, because you need half of this tin goes into the white, half goes into the dark, you can pour it into a pot and stir it and melt it lightly, or do that in the microwave. All I did was I took my water bath water and I put the whole tin in it just to warm it up. So now this condensed milk should be quite fluid and just lightly warmed. And I'm just going to eyeball it and put in half into the white chocolate, half into the dark. Oh yeah, let's get all of that goodness in there. And now you just give this a little stir to each to combine. This white chocolate glaze is really something special. Yum. And now do the same for the dark. Until you see, you'll watch it sort of change consistency a little bit. It may look at first like it's not smooth, but then keep stirring and those ingredients will come together. This is not a glaze. The only thing that would cause this to split is if any of the ingredients were too hot, that it would shock the chocolate. But now we've got a beautiful, this is why I like the condensed milk, that gloss. And that gloss doesn't go away. Even when the cake is chilled, it has this beautiful shiny satin finish to it. So now, because this glaze is thinner than the cake batters we were dealing with, you can't really dollop it on, but what I do is pour ribbons of the glaze. So I'm going to save a little bit, and then I do the same in a different direction with the chocolate. You want to get some good coverage there. And now back to the vanilla. A little more chocolate. Make sure we cover all our space there. Ooh. Nice. And now another skewer. And start pulling that glaze through. And don't forget, you're going to see it not just on top, but when you cut into it. So I put a lot of vanilla at the base. So I'm going to try and pull my vanilla glaze through over on this side. Glorious. Now, technically, you should let this chill in the fridge for a couple of hours because this glaze is quite fluid. But you know, I like to give you a taste of what's inside. How are we doing on our likes? Oh, we're at 676. That's awesome. Do you think we can hit 750? Once you see a slice of this cake, you're going to want to be hitting like. And if you are just joining us now, I have spent the last 40 minutes making a beautiful decadent glazed marble cake with a decadent double chocolate glaze, a white and a milk chocolate glaze on top of it. Oh, and hello to you in Diego in Barcelona. That's amazing. And to Brazil. Oh, everybody's loving this cake. Oh, Cassia Tree is asking about moisture at the top of the cake. That's a good question. Condensation is usually why you get surface moisture to begin with. Do make sure before you wrap a cake that you let it cool completely. And before you change its temperature, before you put it from cooling on the rack into the fridge, make sure it's cooled completely because that's where condensation can form. I hope that helps your question. Oh, it's great to see everybody where they're writing in from. Ira's asking, could you use this cake recipe for cupcakes? You certainly could. It's going to be a little more work. You'll have to do smaller dollops and smaller swirls, but I think it would look lovely. And then just be careful you don't fill your cupcake cup if you want to top them with the glaze so that there's room within the paper liner to put that glaze on top. So we are going to remember, you've seen the photo, and if you want to revisit this photo, you'll see it on the community page, what the photo looks like after the cake has chilled. Because when I cut into this, because the glaze is still warm, it is going to run. But know that once it's been refrigerated, it sets, it cuts beautifully cleanly, so the glaze stays in place on top, revealing that beautiful marble in between. So I'm going to do a very messy job of this. I'm already warning you. And you can also see why I like to bake this. Well, I don't bake a lot of my cakes in a ceramic dish. This is one that you can take to the table, so making that choice. To use a ceramic dish really counts. Oh yeah, this is going to be sticky. Well, it's going to be more of a sauce than it is going to be an icing on top. But I don't think you're going to have too much of a problem with that. Whoa, look at that decadence. I think I'm allowed to lick my fingers for this one. Oh yeah, the condensed milk makes such a difference. And let's see if I can, because the glaze is running, let me just pull some away. Oh, look at that bite. And so you've got that real split between the chocolate and the marble, and then the white chocolate and the dark chocolate on top of the glaze. So it's a perfect cake for someone who loves chocolate but doesn't want to be overwhelmed with chocolate. Beautifully moist and tender. Yeah, this cake is definitely worth a try, and I love hearing about you trying your recipes. Please come back to this video when we post it on the channel after you've made the cake and tell us how yours turned out, because my job here is not just to show you what I can do. I want to show you what you can do. And so let me take a bite first, and then I'll talk with my mouth full before I sign off. Oh, we hit it. We hit 750. That's amazing. Thank you, everyone. Oh, and Michael wants me to put the cake.
No, the portion can go here.
The portion? Okay.
Thank you.
It's a bit messy looking, so I'm not sure. All right, Michael's going to find its best angle, as he does with me, too. I'm very grateful for that. So we're going to take a look at the little cake now while I take a last peek at this thread. Oh, Diego asked a good question. Would this cake have the same effect using ruby chocolate? That's a fantastic question. Oh, I gave you a really, that's my take a bite side, really messy. Oh, it's messy. Here, how about that side? Treat ruby chocolate like white chocolate. So I would do dark chocolate in the cake, Diego, but you could certainly do a ruby chocolate glaze. I have some here. You could do a ruby chocolate glaze. So in the white chocolate portion that calls for the 150 grams, use 150 grams of ruby chocolate. You treat ruby like white, and it would add a lovely natural pink color to the cake. Fantastic. Kezia asks, does baking paper affect the crust a cake has in the oven? No, it really doesn't. It's simply about ease in removing the cake from the pan. The only time it makes a difference is if you're lining the sides of your pan. A really wet batter will cause the paper to pucker, so you won't get a clean line to the outside of your cake. That's really the only time it makes a big difference. And Maha's asking, how many 8-inch round sheet cakes can I get with this recipe? Now, if you wanted to do a 2-layer cake with the cake about 3 centimeters tall, I think this recipe, you would get 2 8-inch pans with some nice structure. If you wanted to do a 3-layer cake and have the layers slightly thinner, I think you could push it to 3, but not more than that. And of course, please adapt your bake times. Because if you make this cake, as I said, takes 40 to 60 minutes, baked in a big pan, that time will be significantly reduced if you split it between round pans. That's a very, very good question. I see the question come in quite a bit about substitutions for the condensed milk. There's not a substitution for this particular glaze recipe. I would recommend you look to some of my other glazes. I have a great glaze on my Boston cream pie recipe right here on the channel. That ganache glaze would work beautifully in place of this condensed milk glaze if you don't have access to condensed milk. And we've got a couple requests for eggless cake recipes. I do have quite a few, and I don't know that any are on the channel. So you know what? Part of what OYUM 201 is based on is your requests. And so I will take that to heart, and maybe you'll see me do a live stream soon. But you can count on in 2 weeks, just a reminder, I'm not here next week, but in 2 weeks I'll be back and we're gonna go through tempering chocolate. That is definitely an OYUM 201. If you've never tempered chocolate before, I'm gonna have you walk away confident that you can. And I just wanna take a moment before I sign off, and just show you the cake. It has 18 minutes still left. So this is only halfway through baking. And I love how the cake itself relates to the glazed cake version at the very end. I don't want to leave this out of the heat too long, or it'll start to sink in the middle. Oh, but it kind of smells delicious in here, I have to say. So there we have it, a decadent marble cake with 2 separate cake batters. Not to give you more work, but I know you love baking, and you're gonna love that the 2 batters work so well together. This decadent marble glaze with white and dark chocolate. You've got your plans for the weekend. Do some baking, enjoy, and it's been my pleasure to share OYUM 201 with you. Have a good afternoon, everyone, or evening, or morning. Everyone can make this.